It's a strange fact that beneath the dusty plains of modern-day Iraq lies the buried heart of what we consider civilization, a place where people first gathered in numbers that would make a modern-day city planner blink. Imagine a world where the very idea of a city was being invented, not just built, but conceived in the minds of early humans. Picture vast, fertile floodplains fed by the ancient arteries of the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, a place where the air shimmered with heat and the promise of endless bounty. It was here, in this primordial landscape, that Uruk began its silent, steady march towards greatness, a journey that would redefine human settlement and society forever. The mysteries of its origin, the forgotten names of its earliest inhabitants, linger in the air like a phantom whisper, even as we unearth their meticulously crafted tools and the faint outlines of their first permanent homes. They walked this ground, breathed this air, and left behind an indelible mark, shaping a future they could never have truly imagined. I'm glad you're here, wishing you peace, rest, and maybe a little historical inspiration before sleep. Take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Feel free to post your location and local time in the comments below. It's always fascinating to see where everyone is tuning in from. So let's drift back to a time long before written history, when the first whispers of communal living began to echo across the southern Mesopotamian plains, around the 6th millennium BCE. In these distant epochs, small scattered settlements, barely more than clusters of reed huts and simple mud brick dwellings, dotted the landscape. These were not cities, not yet, but the nascent sparks of what would become Uruk were already smoldering. Picture a collection of independent villages, each a tiny universe unto itself, sustained by the generous, albeit unpredictable flow of the Euphrates. The river, a life-giver and sometimes a destroyer, deposited rich alluvial silts, transforming arid earth into incredibly fertile farmland. This wasn't farming as we know it today. With precise irrigation systems and genetically modified crops, this was a constant negotiation with nature, a delicate dance of planting and harvesting in the wake of the river's ebb and flow. The people of these early settlements, proto-Urukians, if you will, were mastering the fundamental skills necessary for survival. Cultivating barley and wheat, herding goats and sheep, and learning to manage the erratic floods that could bring both prosperity and ruin. Life was communal, driven by necessity and the shared struggle against the elements. There were no grand temples, no imposing walls, just the collective effort of small groups of people trying to make a living from the land. But even in these humble beginnings, a subtle shift was occurring. As agricultural techniques improved, perhaps a bit of trial and error here, a fortunate observation there, the surplus of food began to grow. And with surplus came the first glimmerings of something more complex than simple subsistence. The possibility of supporting individuals who didn't spend every waking hour tilling fields or tending flocks. Think of it like this. If everyone has to farm all day, every day, there's no one free to invent the wheel or design a better plow, or even just sit around and think really hard about how to organize society. Archaeological evidence, a language of shattered pottery and half-buried foundations, tells us that these early settlements, though small, were slowly becoming more interconnected. There's a fascinating theory, still debated among scholars, that the very act of managing the complex irrigation systems necessary for large-scale agriculture might have been a catalyst for greater social organization. Imagine dozens of small communities, each needing to ensure water flowed to their fields, but also needing to prevent it from flooding their neighbors. It's a logistical nightmare, right? So perhaps a primitive form of cooperation, of shared decision-making, began to emerge out of sheer practical need. It's like a prehistoric neighborhood watch, but for water. This wasn't centralized power as we understand it. Not yet. But a slow, organic process where communities began to see the benefit of working together on a larger scale. The early pottery found in these sites, often undecorated and utilitarian, speaks volumes about the priorities of the time. These weren't artistic masterpieces. They were tools for storage, for cooking, for the daily grind of survival. Yet, even in their simplicity, they show a progression, a gradual refinement of technique that hints at developing skills and perhaps even early specialization. Someone, somewhere, was getting really good at making pots, and others were getting really good at farming. And slowly, imperceptibly, the division of labor, the bedrock of complex societies, was starting to form. These were the seeds, tiny and almost invisible, of the urban revolution that would explode in Uruk. The vast stretches of open land, once sparsely populated, were slowly, steadily filling with the hum of human activity, the rhythm of life accelerating with each passing generation. The foundational layers of mud brick that would eventually support monumental structures were being laid, one simple dwelling at a time, across centuries of diligent effort. As those scattered early settlements began to coalesce, the stage was set for the Ubaid period, a fascinating chapter in Mesopotamian prehistory, roughly spanning from 6500 to 4100 BCE. This wasn't just a time of quiet growth. It was a period where the fundamental building blocks of complex society were being meticulously, almost painstakingly, assembled, like a colossal slow-motion Lego project. Imagine tiny villages, once isolated, now beginning to form connections, sharing not just ideas, but also distinctive pottery styles that archaeologists today can trace across vast distances. This widespread, relatively uniform pottery, often a buff-colored ware with geometric designs painted in dark brown or black, is a hallmark of the Ubaid culture. It's almost like everyone suddenly decided that stripes and zigzags were the fashion statement for their ceramic wares. During the Ubaid period, the improvements in agricultural sophistication truly began to take hold. We're talking about more than just throwing seeds on the ground and hoping for the best. This era saw the development of more advanced irrigation techniques, allowing farmers to cultivate larger areas more efficiently and reliably. They were learning to control the volatile Euphrates, not perfectly, but well enough to coax more life from its fertile banks. This meant consistent food surpluses. And as any ancient civilization will tell you, a full belly is the foundation of progress. When people aren't constantly worried about where their next meal is coming from, they have time for other things, like thinking about how to build bigger, better, or perhaps, for the truly ambitious, how to rule over others. With these agricultural advancements came the first clear signs of social stratification. It wasn't an instant transformation into a rigid class system, but rather a gradual emergence of differences in wealth and status. Think of it like a subtle ripple effect. If one family consistently produces more grain than another, they start to accumulate more resources. Over generations, this accumulation can translate into greater influence and power. Archaeological digs from Ubaid sites reveal larger, more elaborate houses for some families, alongside smaller, simpler dwellings for others. Grave goods also tell a story. Some burials contain more valuable items, indicating that not everyone was treated equally in death, suggesting they weren't equal in life either. It's like finding a prehistoric trust fund baby. Another critical development was the rise of temple structures. These weren't just simple shrines. They were increasingly large and elaborate buildings, often situated on raised platforms, suggesting their growing importance within the community. These early temples, built of mud brick, served as more than just places of worship. They likely functioned as communal storehouses for surplus goods, centers for redistribution, and perhaps even early administrative hubs. Imagine a village elder or a particularly charismatic individual taking on the role of overseeing the temple's resources. This person, with religious authority and control over the community's wealth, would naturally gain significant influence. It's the ancient equivalent of being both the pastor and the bank manager. A pretty sweet deal, if you ask me. These emerging religious and administrative centers became focal points for population aggregation. People naturally gravitated towards places that offered security, shared resources, and spiritual guidance. The scattered small villages began to merge, or perhaps new settlements grew up around these increasingly prominent temple complexes. This wasn't a forced migration, but a natural magnetic pull towards a centralizing force. You can almost imagine someone saying, "Hey, they've got better irrigation and a bigger temple over there. Let's move." And so, slowly but surely, the population density began to increase in certain favored locations. While the Ubaid period didn't give us the sprawling megalopolis that Uruk would become, it laid the essential groundwork. It perfected the agricultural techniques needed to support a large, non-farming population, developed the initial forms of social hierarchy necessary for organized labor, and established the temple as a central institution for both spiritual and temporal power. Without these foundational steps, Uruk's later explosion onto the historical scene would have been impossible. It's like the quiet, methodical work of laying rebar before pouring the concrete for a skyscraper. You don't see it when the building is finished, but it's absolutely crucial. The shift from scattered, egalitarian farming communities to more centralized, hierarchically organized proto-urban centers was subtle, almost imperceptible to those living through it. But it was profoundly transformative. The very idea of a shared public space, of collective enterprise beyond the family unit, was being forged in the heat of Mesopotamian summers and the cool damp of its fertile fields. Out of the fertile crucible of the Ubaid period, where the whispers of early communal living were slowly growing into a murmur, a truly transformative development began to take shape in southern Mesopotamia, particularly at the site that would one day be called Uruk, the rise of the Iana and Anu districts. Imagine, if you will, not just one, but two monumental centers emerging within the nascent city, each dedicated to a powerful deity, each vying, perhaps subtly, for influence, and together forming the very heart and soul of Uruk. This wasn't a sudden architectural epiphany. It was the culmination of centuries of gradual accretion, of rebuilding older, smaller shrines into something truly awe-inspiring. It's like upgrading your garden shed into a full-blown mansion and then deciding you need a second, even grander mansion right next door, just for good measure. The Iana district, dedicated to Inanna, later Ishtar, the goddess of love, war, and fertility, was arguably the more prominent and certainly the more archaeologically impressive of the two. Think of Inanna as the ancient Mesopotamian equivalent of a celebrity influencer, but with actual divine powers and a penchant for monumental architecture. As settlements around Uruk grew, so too did the devotion to Inanna, manifesting in increasingly elaborate temple complexes. These weren't just simple mud brick rooms anymore. They were vast, intricate structures, often built on immense platforms, with courtyards, halls, and countless chambers. The sheer scale of these constructions suggests a level of organized labor and communal effort that was unprecedented. Imagine thousands of people, organized into work gangs, digging, hauling, and laying millions of mud bricks under the relentless Mesopotamian sun. It's hard work, folks, and it points to a very persuasive authority figure, or figures, indeed. Concurrently, the Anu district was developing, dedicated to Anu, the sky god, considered the supreme deity in the Sumerian pantheon. While perhaps less explored archaeologically than Iana, the Anu district, with its white temple perched atop the monumental ziggurat of Anu, later Iana, still represents an incredible feat of early engineering and religious devotion. The white temple, so named for its whitewashed walls, would have gleamed in the sunlight, a beacon visible for miles across the flat plains. The fact that it was built on such a high platform, a proto-ziggurat, suggests a desire to literally reach for the heavens, to connect with the divine in a tangible, imposing way. It's a bit like building your church on the highest hill in town, just to make sure God doesn't miss it. These two districts served as much more than just religious centers. They were the initial roles as religious and administrative centers of Uruk, blurring the lines between the sacred and the secular in a way that is profoundly alien to modern sensibilities. The temples acted as colossal economic engines. They owned vast tracts of land, employed armies of laborers, artisans, and scribes, and managed the distribution of resources. Think of them as the ancient world's combination of a church, a bank, a factory, and the local government office, all rolled into one impressive package. Surplus agricultural produce, collected as offerings or taxes, was stored in temple granaries, providing a buffer against lean times and a source of wealth for civic projects. This centralized control over resources allowed for the funding of even grander construction projects, creating a feedback loop of increasing power and complexity. One fascinating aspect, still a subject of scholarly debate, is the exact relationship between these two powerful districts. Were they cooperative, working in tandem for the greater good of Uruk? Or was there a subtle rivalry, a kind of ancient urban competition to see whose god had the bigger, shinier temple? The archaeological record doesn't give us clear answers, but the presence of two distinct monumental centers suggests a complex power dynamic at play, perhaps a balance of religious authority that prevented any single faction from gaining absolute control. It's like having two major universities in one city, each with its own prestige and patronage, both contributing to the overall intellectual vibrancy, but perhaps also occasionally elbowing each other for top ranking. The very act of constructing these monumental complexes required unprecedented levels of organization. Someone had to plan the buildings, someone had to supervise the labor, someone had to ensure that the millions of mud bricks were made and transported. This demand for coordination likely spurred the development of early administrative structures, the very precursors to bureaucracy and formal governance. The temples, therefore, weren't just reflections of Uruk's growing power. They were also the engines that drove it, forcing the evolution of new societal structures to manage the sheer scale of their ambition. Their rising walls symbolized not just devotion, but the ascent of Uruk itself from a cluster of villages to a true urban marvel. As the monumental Iana and Anu districts rose, transforming Uruk's skyline, another, perhaps less visually dramatic, yet equally revolutionary, change was sweeping through its workshops: the ceramic revolution and specialization. While massive temples grab headlines, it was often the humble pottery, a seemingly mundane aspect of daily life, that quietly signaled profound shifts in economic and societal organization. Imagine, if you will, the bustling, smoky workshops of ancient Uruk, not just a few potters crafting individual artistic pieces, but rather an assembly line of sorts, churning out thousands upon thousands of utilitarian vessels. This was a direct departure from the earlier, more individualized pottery traditions, and it points to a city rapidly scaling up its production capacity. It's like going from bespoke, handcrafted mugs to an entire warehouse full of identical, mass-produced coffee cups. Less charming, perhaps, but incredibly efficient for a rapidly growing population. The star of this ceramic revolution was undoubtedly the bevel-rimmed bowl. Now, if you're picturing something delicate and exquisitely painted, you'd be hilariously mistaken. The bevel-rimmed bowl was the ancient world's disposable fast food container. It was a crude, thick-walled, unpainted, conical vessel, often with a distinctive bevel cut around its rim, hence the name. These bowls were almost certainly made in molds, or at least very rapidly formed by hand, indicating a production method geared towards speed and volume rather than aesthetic appeal. They are found in astonishing numbers at Uruk and other Uruk-influenced sites, often in layers upon layers, suggesting they were used once or a few times and then discarded. Think of them as the styrofoam cups of the 4th millennium BCE. Not exactly Instagram-worthy, but supremely practical. The sheer proliferation of these bowls signaled Uruk's economic and societal shifts in several crucial ways. Firstly, their standardized size and ubiquitous presence strongly suggest they were used for rationing or distributing food portions to a large labor force. Picture thousands of workers, perhaps engaged in the colossal task of building those temples or ziggurats we just discussed. Needing to be fed quickly and efficiently, a fixed-size bowl would be perfect for handing out daily rations of grain or gruel. This implies a highly organized system of labor management, where a central authority, likely the temple administration, was responsible for feeding its workers. It's the ancient equivalent of a company cafeteria, but with less variety and probably no dessert. Secondly, the mass production of these bowls points directly to specialization of labor. No longer was every household making its own pottery. Instead, there were dedicated potters, or groups of potters, whose sole job was to churn out these functional vessels. This freed up other members of society to focus on other tasks: farming, building, administration, even perhaps early forms of bureaucratic accounting. This division of labor is a cornerstone of complex societies, allowing for greater efficiency and the accumulation of specialized knowledge and skills. It's a classic example of how solving a practical problem, how to feed a lot of people, can have profound unintended consequences for societal structure. Furthermore, the widespread distribution of these bevel-rimmed bowls beyond Uruk itself, found at distant sites associated with the Uruk expansion, suggests their role as a kind of cultural identifier or administrative tool. They weren't just for Uruk's internal consumption. They were part of the Uruk package that traveled with its influence, whether they were used to provision Urukian envoys, laborers sent abroad, or even as a simple, recognizable symbol of Uruk's administrative reach. Their presence is a clear archaeological marker of the city's extensive network. A fascinating, still debated historiographic mystery surrounding these bowls is their exact purpose. While rationing is the lead-in theory, some scholars suggest they might also have been used for baking bread, for ritual purposes, or even as molds for other objects. The truth is, we don't have a definitive bevel-rimmed bowl user manual from 3500 BCE. However, their sheer quantity and utilitarian nature make a strong case for their role in large-scale, centrally managed economy. What is clear is that they represent a technological and organizational leap, a stark indicator of Uruk's shift from a collection of self-sufficient villages to a truly urban, highly structured society, capable of mobilizing vast human resources. This seemingly simple piece of pottery tells a complex story of power, organization, and the daily lives of thousands of people working to build the world's first true city, from the burgeoning workshops churning out endless bevel-rimmed bowls. A profound transformation was rapidly unfolding across Uruk's landscape. The explosive urbanization and population growth. Imagine, in a relatively short span of centuries, a collection of humble agricultural settlements swelling into a sprawling, vibrant metropolis. A city whose very existence redefined what human habitation could be. This wasn't merely incremental expansion. It was a phenomenon, a magnet drawing people from the surrounding countryside like iron filings to a powerful force, creating what many scholars consider the world's first true city. The transition from scattered villages to a densely populated urban center was a dizzying acceleration of human history, a process that still fascinates and perplexes archaeologists today. It's like watching a quiet rural town suddenly become a bustling megacity, seemingly overnight, driven by some invisible, irresistible current. By the late 4th millennium BCE, particularly during the Uruk-hai and the Thrid periods, roughly 3500–3100 BCE, Uruk reached truly astonishing dimensions. While exact population figures are always estimates, the archaeological evidence points to an unprecedented concentration of people. Imagine a city that, at its peak, encompassed an area of 500 to 600 hectares. That's about 1,200 to 1,500 acres, encircled by massive defensive walls that stretched for miles. To put that into perspective, that's larger than many European capitals, well into the medieval period. Within those walls, estimates range from 40,000 to 80,000 inhabitants, and some even propose figures exceeding 100,000. Just picture the sheer density of life, the constant hum of activity, the mingling of thousands of voices, the smells of cooking fires and crowded markets. This was no sleepy village. This was a living, breathing, pulsing urban organism. The transformation from a collection of villages into a densely populated urban center wasn't accidental. Several factors converged to fuel this extraordinary growth. The previously discussed advancements in agriculture, especially the refined irrigation techniques of the Ubaid period, created a consistent and abundant food surplus. This surplus could feed a large non-farming population, freeing up individuals to specialize in crafts, administration, and religious duties. As the temples grew in power and wealth, they attracted more people, not just as worshippers, but as laborers, artisans, and administrators. The promise of work, of community, of security behind those increasingly formidable walls must have been a powerful draw for those living in less protected rural areas. It's the ancient version of moving to the big city for better opportunities. Only instead of skyscrapers, you're looking at towering ziggurats. This dramatic population influx led to profound changes in the very fabric of society. The close-knit, kinship-based structures of villages began to give way to more complex, anonymous social relationships characteristic of urban life. Imagine the challenge of governing such a diverse and rapidly expanding populace. New systems of social control, dispute resolution, and resource allocation became essential. The temple administration, already central to Uruk's economy, likely expanded its bureaucratic apparatus to manage the needs of this vast urban population. This included everything from organizing the provision of water and food to maintaining public order and coordinating monumental building projects. One of the interesting scholarly debates surrounding Uruk's urbanization concerns whether the growth was primarily organic, driven by internal demographic forces and economic pull, or if there was an element of coerced centralization, perhaps a powerful elite forcing rural populations to move into the city for better control and labor mobilization. While it's difficult to definitively prove coercion, the scale of some of the monumental projects, like the city walls, certainly suggests a powerful central authority capable of commanding vast human resources. It's probably a combination of both. People were attracted by opportunity, but once there, they were integrated into a highly organized and likely hierarchical system. The sheer density of living within Uruk also had significant implications for public health, sanitation, and social interaction. While we don't have detailed health records from 3000 BCE, it's safe to assume that disease spread quickly in such crowded conditions. Yet the city persisted and thrived, a testament to the organizational capacity of its inhabitants. The urban environment itself spurred innovation, creating a dynamic crucible where ideas, technologies, and social structures could rapidly evolve. Uruk was not just a collection of buildings. It was a vibrant, pulsing ecosystem where civilization, as we know it, was truly taking its first confident steps. With Uruk's population swelling and its societal structures solidifying, the natural next step in its meteoric rise was the emergence of monumental architecture. Imagine, if you will, the sheer audacity of it, building structures so vast, so elaborate, that they would dwarf anything seen before. testifying not just to wealth and power, but to an unshakable belief in the divine and the collective might of an organized populace. This wasn't just about putting a roof over someone's head. It was about shaping the very landscape, creating symbols of power that could be seen for miles across the flat Mesopotamian plains. These colossal temples and ziggurats were the ancient world's skyscrapers, proclaiming Uruk's burgeoning power to anyone who might gaze upon them. The construction of Uruk's colossal temples and ziggurats represents an astounding feat of ancient engineering, especially given the limited technology available. We're talking about the late 4th millennium BCE, remember? No steel girders, no concrete mixers, no bulldozers. Everything was built with human labor, simple tools, and the humble, yet incredibly versatile, mud brick. Kilns were used for some specialized bricks, but the vast majority were sun-dried, requiring immense quantities of clay, straw, and water, mixed by hand and pressed into molds, then left to bake under the relentless sun. Picture thousands of people, day in and day out, engaged in this labor-intensive process. Their hands caked with mud, their backs aching from the endless toil. It's hard to complain about modern construction delays when you consider what they accomplished with just grit and elbow grease. The most famous of these structures are found in the Iana district, dedicated to Inanna. Here, archaeologists have unearthed successive layers of awe-inspiring buildings, each grander than the last. The limestone temple, for example, was a massive structure built on a raised platform, its walls constructed from imported limestone blocks, a clear indication of Uruk's ability to mobilize resources from significant distances. Then there's the Cone Mosaic Temple, its exterior decorated with thousands upon thousands of small colored clay cones pressed into the mud plaster, creating intricate geometric patterns. Imagine the dizzying, painstaking work involved in placing each one of those cones by hand, day after day. It must have been a job that required both extreme patience and a complete lack of vertigo. But perhaps the most iconic symbol of Uruk's architectural prowess is the White Temple, perched atop the ziggurat of Anu. While the ziggurat itself was likely a stepped platform rather than a true multi-tiered pyramid in this early stage, its sheer height and mass were immense. The temple at its summit, whitewashed to brilliant effect, would have been a beacon. Visible from far away, the effort required to build such a structure, transporting all that mud brick, elevating it piece by piece to such a height, speaks volumes about the centralized organization and power of Uruk's leadership. It wasn't just about faith, it was about projecting power, both divine and earthly. These structures were not merely religious buildings. They were the heart of Uruk's urban identity, embodying its burgeoning power. Their scale alone would have instilled a sense of awe and reverence in the populace, reinforcing the authority of the priests and rulers who presided over them. They were also powerful symbols to rival city-states and distant polities, silently proclaiming Uruk's economic might and its capacity for organized collective action. "Look what we can build," they seem to say. "Imagine what else we can do." This architectural display was a form of ancient soft power, communicating Uruk's dominance without firing a single arrow. A significant scholarly debate revolves around the precise function of these early monumental temples. While their religious significance is undeniable, Their role in the city's economic and administrative life is equally crucial. Were they primarily centers for cult and ritual, with economic functions as a secondary aspect? Or were they primarily economic powerhouses, with religious ideology serving to legitimize and reinforce their administrative control? The truth, as often is the case, probably lies somewhere in the middle, a complex interweaving of spiritual belief and practical governance. The temples likely served as central granaries, workshops, and administrative offices, employing vast numbers of people and managing the distribution of goods and resources across the city and its surrounding agricultural lands. Their very size necessitated a complex bureaucracy to manage their daily operations, a system that foreshadowed much later governmental structures. The air around these towering edifices would have hummed not just with prayers, but with the sounds of commerce, construction, and bureaucratic pronouncements, a vibrant testament to a city truly coming into its own. As Uruk's colossal temples pierced the sky and its population swelled, an even more fundamental revolution was quietly, almost imperceptibly, taking hold within the temple administrations and burgeoning economic centers. The birth of writing, specifically proto-cuneiform. Imagine a time when knowledge and transactions were confined to the limits of human memory or simple verbal agreements. Suddenly, a new technology emerges that allows information to be recorded, stored, and transmitted with unprecedented accuracy and permanence. This wasn't some sudden flash of genius, a eureka moment for a lone inventor. It was a slow, practical evolution, driven by the sheer complexity of managing Uruk's vast economy and its monumental projects. The story of writing begins not with poetry or epic tales, but with ledgers and receipts, because even back then, someone needed to keep track of who owed what to whom. The need for a system to manage the immense quantities of goods flowing through Uruk's temple complexes became overwhelming. How do you track thousands of sheep, countless bushels of barley, or hundreds of laborers without a reliable method of record keeping? Oral traditions simply couldn't cope with the scale. Enter the earliest forms of writing, initially appearing in the late 4th millennium BCE during Uruk's Uruk IV period. These initial attempts were not sophisticated literary works. They were purely utilitarian, economic documents. They were the world's first spreadsheets, meticulously tracking inputs and outputs. The evolution of proto-cuneiform began with simple pictograms. Picture a basic drawing of a head to represent a person, an ear of barley for grain, or a stylized ox head for cattle. These were direct representations of objects. If you wanted to record 5 sheep, you'd draw 5 sheep. Simple enough, right? But what if you wanted to record 5 dead sheep, or 5 sheep delivered? The system quickly became cumbersome and ambiguous. This is where the brilliant, yet entirely practical, innovation began. Over time, these pictograms began to become more abstract and stylized, losing their direct resemblance to the objects they represented. This was partly for efficiency. It's much quicker to draw a few lines than a detailed picture of a sheep. But more importantly, the signs started to represent not just objects, but also sounds or concepts. This crucial step, known as the rebus principle, was a game changer. For example, a drawing of an arrow, pronounced tai in Sumerian, could also represent the word life, also tai. It's like if in English A picture of a bee could also mean the verb be. This allowed for the representation of abstract ideas, grammatical elements, and even personal names, moving writing beyond simple accounting. The clay tablets, impressed with a stylus, transformed from pictures into a system of wedge-shaped marks. The very essence of cuneiform, meaning wedge-shaped. The primary function of these early written texts was unequivocally administrative. We find lists of goods, records of transactions, tallies of laborers, and inventories of temple property. These tablets paint a vivid, if dry, picture of Uruk's bustling economic life. They reveal a highly centralized economy, where the temple acted as a massive redistribution center, collecting goods and then dispensing them as wages or rations. This level of bureaucratic organization would have been impossible without writing. Imagine trying to run a multi-million-dollar corporation with no computers, no paper, and no memory beyond what a few people could hold in their heads. It simply wouldn't work. A fascinating scholarly debate concerns the literacy rates in early Uruk. Was writing a specialized skill held by a small elite of scribes? Or was there a broader understanding of these signs among the general populace, at least for basic transactions? While complex literary texts were certainly the domain of trained scribes, the utilitarian nature and widespread use of proto-cuneiform for daily economic activities suggest that a basic level of comprehension might have been more common than previously thought. It's like understanding traffic signs. You don't need to be an engineer to know what a stop sign means. This new tool, born out of necessity, not intellectual curiosity, fundamentally altered the cognitive landscape of Uruk. It allowed for the accumulation of knowledge, the standardization of procedures, and the creation of a vast, interconnected administrative network that stretched far beyond the city walls. The scratching of a reed stylus on wet clay laid the very foundation for history itself, with writing taking its first hesitant, then confident, steps in Uruk's administrative halls. A far broader phenomenon was simultaneously unfolding, the Uruk expansion phenomenon. Imagine Uruk not just as a thriving metropolis, but as a radiating cultural and economic powerhouse, its influence extending far beyond its massive walls, touching distant lands, and profoundly reshaping the ancient Near East. This wasn't necessarily a military conquest in the traditional sense, though military might certainly wasn't out of the question. Rather, it was a complex process of cultural diffusion, trade networks, and perhaps even colonial-style outposts, spreading Uruk's sophisticated urban model across Mesopotamia and beyond. It's like a prehistoric version of cultural globalization. But instead of pop music and fast food, they were exporting administrative techniques, architectural styles, and those ever-present bevel-rimmed bowls. Beginning in the Middle and Late Uruk periods, roughly 3500–3100 BCE, evidence of Uruk's reach appears across a vast geographical area. From northern Mesopotamia, modern-day Syria and Turkey, to southwestern Iran, archaeological sites reveal clear Urukian characteristics. We're talking about distinctive pottery, specific architectural layouts, administrative tablets, and even specific types of seals. It's like finding a consistent brand label across a huge variety of ancient goods, indicating a common origin or pervasive influence. This widespread material culture provides compelling evidence that Uruk was not an isolated marvel, but rather the heart of a truly extensive network. The spread of Uruk's cultural and economic model took various forms. One prominent theory suggests the establishment of trading colonies or outposts. Imagine small groups of Urukian merchants, scribes, and administrators venturing out from the homeland, settling in strategically important locations along major trade routes. These outposts, like Habuba Kabira and Jebel Aruda in Syria, were not simply local villages. They were deliberately planned settlements, often with clear Urukian architectural styles, monumental buildings, albeit on a smaller scale than Uruk itself, and distinctive Urukian artifacts. They functioned as nodes in a vast economic network, facilitating the procurement of raw materials that Uruk lacked, such as timber, metals, and precious stones. It's like setting up supply chain hubs in resource-rich areas, ensuring a steady flow back to the industrial heartland. Another aspect of the expansion was the diffusion of ideas and technologies. Local cultures, witnessing the advanced administrative techniques, monumental architecture, and the sheer organizational power of Uruk, may have adopted elements of the Urukian model. This could have been through direct interaction, emulation, or even a desire to participate in Uruk's prosperous economic sphere. The concept of writing, for instance, which originated in Uruk, eventually spread across Mesopotamia, though local adaptations and innovations certainly occurred. It's akin to how modern business practices or technologies spread globally, adopted and adapted by different regions. A significant historiographic mystery and ongoing scholarly debate centers on the exact nature of this expansion. Was it primarily driven by peaceful trade and cultural exchange, a kind of benign hegemon shaping its world through soft power? Or was there an underlying element of coercion, of Uruk flexing its considerable economic and perhaps even military muscle to ensure its access to vital resources? While direct evidence of large-scale military conquest is scarce for this period, it's difficult to imagine such an extensive and powerful network operating without some degree of political leverage or the implicit threat of force. The Uruk state was highly organized and clearly capable of mobilizing large populations, so it's not unreasonable to assume they could field an army if necessary. Regardless of the precise mechanisms, the Uruk expansion had a profound and lasting impact on the ancient Near East. It helped to spread the concepts of urbanism, monumental architecture, advanced administration, and writing to diverse regions, laying the groundwork for subsequent civilizations. The very idea of a complex, stratified society centered around large cities with specialized labor and extensive trade networks was solidified and propagated by Uruk's example. The ripple effects of Uruk's influence would be felt for centuries, demonstrating that even in an age without mass media, the power of a successful model could travel vast distances. The sprawling reach of Uruk's influence created a shared cultural horizon, a network of interdependencies that knitted together distant lands and laid the initial threads of a truly interconnected ancient world. As Uruk's influence radiated outwards through the Uruk expansion, the logistical demands of supporting its burgeoning urban population and monumental projects became immense, leading to the development of sophisticated trade networks and resource acquisition strategies. Imagine a city that, despite its fertile agricultural heartland, lacked many of the essential raw materials necessary for its advanced crafts its monumental architecture, and even its daily life. No major sources of timber for roofs and tools, no copper for implements, no gold or lapis lazuli for adornments that symbolized status and religious devotion. Uruk became a colossal engine, constantly drawing in resources from distant lands, a testament to its organizational genius and its ability to forge connections across a vast geographical expanse. It's like a prehistoric megafactory, constantly needing raw materials to churn out its finished products, from divine statues to humble tools. Uruk's immediate surroundings, while excellent for agriculture, were poor in mineral resources and quality timber. The alluvial plains offered abundant clay for mud bricks and pottery, reeds for construction, and fertile land for crops, but little else. To sustain its growth and maintain its sophisticated lifestyle, Uruk had to look outward. This necessity spurred the development of intricate trade routes, some extending hundreds, even thousands of kilometers. These weren't paved highways with roadside diners, mind you. These were often treacherous paths across deserts, along rivers, or through mountain passes, fraught with dangers from harsh environments and potential banditry. The fact that Uruk managed to establish and maintain these networks speaks volumes about its economic power and political influence. The primary resources Uruk sought were varied and vital. For its monumental buildings, timber was crucial, especially large logs for roofing and structural supports in grand halls. These likely came from the forested mountains of the Zagros to the east, or the Lebanon and Taurus Mountains to the northwest. Imagine the immense effort required to fell these trees, fashion them into usable logs, and then transport them, perhaps by floating them down rivers or dragging them across vast stretches of land, all the way back to Uruk. It was a logistical nightmare that they somehow made work. Metals were another critical commodity. Copper, used for tools, weapons, and early implements, likely came from regions like Oman, Anatolia, or the Iranian plateau. Gold and silver, though scarcer, were prized for elite objects and offerings. These precious metals often traveled even greater distances, perhaps through multiple intermediaries, each taking their cut along the way. Think of the ancient version of a global supply chain, but without cargo ships or container terminals, just donkeys and determination. Beyond timber and metals, Uruk imported a range of other exotic materials. Precious stones like lapis lazuli, a vibrant blue stone prized for jewelry and inlay, which originated almost exclusively from Badakhshan in modern-day Afghanistan, an astonishing distance. Carnelian, obsidian, and various types of stone for cylinder seals also flowed into the city. These materials not only served practical purposes, but also symbolized status and facilitated the religious and administrative functions of the city. Owning a piece of lapis lazuli was like flashing a designer watch today. It instantly communicated wealth and connection. The mechanisms of this trade were complex, while direct expeditions by Urukian agents certainly occurred, especially to establish colonies during the Uruk expansion. Much of the trade likely involved intermediaries. Local communities along the trade routes would have acted as transporters, traders, and suppliers, creating a web of economic relationships. The invention of writing played a crucial role here. Administrative tablets from Uruk detail various transactions, demonstrating the bureaucratic oversight of these far-flung economic ventures. This allows scholars to trace albeit sometimes speculatively. The flow of goods and the organization behind it, a fascinating mainstream historical fact often discussed, is how the cylinder seal, an invention of the Uruk period, became an indispensable tool for managing these vast networks. These small carved stone cylinders, when rolled over wet clay, left a unique impression, acting as a signature, a mark of ownership, or a way to secure goods. Imagine a warehouse full of goods, each sealed with a distinctive impression, ensuring accountability and preventing tampering. This simple invention was a cornerstone of early commerce and administration, without which such extensive trade might have been impossible. The meticulousness required to manage such a complex web of exchange highlights Uruk's extraordinary capacity for organization, a capacity that allowed it to transform raw materials from distant mountains and deserts into the very fabric of its burgeoning civilization. As Uruk's trade networks hummed with activity, drawing in vital resources from distant lands, the internal structure of the city was simultaneously evolving into an intricate tapestry of specialized roles and distinct social strata. This was the era of the social hierarchy and labor organization taking definitive shape, transforming Uruk from a mere collection of people into a highly structured, almost machine-like urban system. Imagine a city where everyone knew their place, from the lowliest laborer shaping mud bricks under the relentless sun, to the powerful priests and administrators who directed the monumental endeavors. This wasn't simply a matter of rich and poor. It was a complex system of interdependence, where specialized skills and positions contributed to the functioning of the entire urban organism. It's a bit like a highly complex clock, where every tiny gear and spring has a specific job, and the whole mechanism relies on them all working in concert. At the apex of this burgeoning hierarchy stood the ruling elite, likely a combination of religious and administrative authorities. These were the individuals who controlled the vast resources of the temples, oversaw the monumental construction projects, and managed the increasingly complex trade networks. Their power was probably legitimized by their perceived connection to the divine, acting as intermediaries between the gods and the human populace. Beneath them were the scribes, a newly emerging and incredibly powerful class. With the invention of proto-cuneiform, scribes were the information managers of Uruk, meticulously recording transactions, inventories, and decrees. Their literacy granted them immense influence, making them indispensable to the functioning of the state. You could almost say they were the ancient world's IT professionals, wielding immense power through their specialized knowledge. Below these elites, Uruk boasted a highly specialized labor force. The sheer scale of construction, the Iana and Anu districts, the city walls, required thousands of dedicated workers. There were the quarrymen, hauling limestone from distant sources, the mud brick makers, churning out millions of bricks, the porters and boatmen, transporting goods, and the countless construction workers, tirelessly building the city's monumental core. But specialization extended beyond construction. We see evidence of full-time potters, their workshops producing the ubiquitous bevel-rimmed bowls and other ceramic wares. There were weavers, metallurgists, jewelers, stone carvers, and agricultural specialists managing the vast temple lands. Each individual or group of individuals focused on a specific task, contributing their expertise to the collective enterprise. This degree of specialization was a direct consequence of the agricultural surplus. When fewer people were needed for direct food production, others were freed up to pursue crafts and services, leading to greater efficiency and higher quality goods. This also fostered a more complex economy, moving beyond simple barter to systems of remuneration, likely involving rations of barley, oil, or wool. The bevel-rimmed bowls, remember, were probably used to distribute these rations, a tangible symbol of the organized system of payment for labor. The emerging class distinctions were not just about wealth, though that was certainly a factor. They were also about status, access to resources, and control over knowledge. While a common laborer might live in a small, simple dwelling, the high priest or a chief administrator would reside in a larger, more comfortable house, adorned with imported goods. Burial practices also reveal these distinctions. Some graves are much richer in grave goods than others, reflecting the social standing of the deceased. This stratification wasn't necessarily fixed. There might have been some degree of social mobility, but the overall trend was towards a more defined hierarchy. A fascinating scholarly debate revolves around the nature of labor mobilization in Uruk. Was the workforce entirely free and compensated, or was there an element of forced labor, corvée duty, or even slavery? While direct evidence for widespread slavery of the chattel type is limited for this early period, it's highly probable that a system of compulsory labor, where citizens owed a certain amount of work to the state, perhaps for a portion of the year, was in place. How else could such massive public works be accomplished without a centralized authority capable of commanding vast human resources? It's unlikely that everyone cheerfully volunteered to dig mud all day, every day, without some form of societal expectation or obligation. The very concept of organized labor on such a grand scale, managed by a burgeoning bureaucracy, represents a foundational shift in human societal organization, establishing precedents for urban life that would echo through millennia, long after Uruk's mud brick walls had crumbled back into the earth. With Uruk's social hierarchies solidifying and its labor force meticulously organized, the very concept of governance took on a new, more centralized form, epitomized by the enigmatic figure of the priest-king and early governance. Imagine a leader who simultaneously embodied the sacred and the secular, whose authority flowed from both divine mandate and practical administrative prowess, ruling over a city that was, in essence, a massive temple economy. This wasn't a separation of church and state. It was a profound fusion where religious ideology provided the ultimate legitimacy for earthly power, and the temple served as the central engine of the city's economic and political life. The priest-king was not merely a ruler. He was the spiritual shepherd and the chief executive officer, all rolled into one impressive, often intimidating package. It's like having a CEO who also claims to have a direct line to the heavens, which, let's be honest, would make those quarterly earnings calls a lot more interesting. The figure of the priest-king, often referred to as the En or Lugal in later Sumerian texts, though the precise terminology for Uruk-Thopot is debated, emerged as the preeminent authority in Uruk during its peak. This leader was not just a political strongman. His power was inextricably linked to the city's patron deity, Inanna for the Yana district, and Anu for the Anu district. He was seen as the earthly steward of the god or goddess, responsible for ensuring divine favor, maintaining the cult, and overseeing the temple's vast estates. His role was to mediate between the human and divine realms, performing elaborate rituals and ensuring the prosperity of the city through proper religious observance. This blend of religious and secular authority was fundamental to Uruk's governance model. Underneath the priest-king, a complex administrative apparatus developed to manage the immense wealth and activity generated by the temple economy. This wasn't a government, as we might understand it today, with distinct ministries and departments, but rather a sprawling bureaucracy centered around the temple institutions. Think of a vast network of administrators, overseers, and scribes, all working to manage the collection of agricultural produce, the organization of labor gangs for monumental construction, the distribution of rations, and the oversight of far-flung trade ventures. The invention of writing, remember, was absolutely crucial here, providing the tools for these early bureaucrats to keep meticulous records of everything. Without those clay tablets, the entire system would have collapsed into chaos. The priest-king's responsibilities were manifold. He was the chief priest, leading rituals and ensuring the proper veneration of the gods. He was the supreme economic manager, directing the flow of goods and resources. He was likely the chief justice, resolving disputes and upholding order within the crowded urban environment. And crucially, he was the commander-in-chief, responsible for the city's defense, especially as Uruk's wealth and influence grew, inevitably attracting the envy of neighboring polities. While direct archaeological evidence for military conflicts during Uruk Fort is limited, the construction of massive city walls suggests a clear awareness of external threats and the need for organized defense. A significant open historiographic mystery surrounds the exact succession of these priest-kings and the precise nature of their authority. Was it hereditary? Were they elected by a council of elders or priests? Did their power evolve from a more communal, less centralized leadership structure? The archaeological record and later Sumerian king lists, which are often legendary in nature, provide tantalizing clues, but no definitive answers. For example, the Sumerian king list mentions figures like Enmerkar, Lugalbanda, and Gilgamesh as early kings of Uruk, blurring the lines between historical fact and mythical narrative. While these figures are often presented as kings, their roles likely encompassed this blend of religious and secular leadership, indicating that the concept of a distinct king, as we understand it, might have been a later development. This early form of governance, where religious and economic power were intertwined and concentrated in the hands of a charismatic leader and his administrative elite, proved remarkably effective for organizing a large, complex urban society. It allowed Uruk to mobilize resources on an unprecedented scale, construct its monumental temples, and project its influence across the wider region. It laid the very foundations for the later kingships and empires of Mesopotamia, demonstrating that order, prosperity, and indeed civilization itself could be forged through centralized authority, even if that authority wore a very grand and perhaps slightly absurd tiara. The magnificent efflorescence of Uruk, characterized by its towering temples, sprawling urban plain, and radiating influence, could not, however, last forever in its most expansive form. Just as surely as the sun rises and sets, the decline of the Uruk expansion became an inevitable if gradual, process, marking a significant shift in the geopolitical landscape of the ancient Near East. Imagine a great wave crashing upon distant shores with immense force, then slowly, almost imperceptibly, receding, leaving behind traces of its passage but no longer exerting its dominant power. The factors contributing to this retraction were complex and multifaceted, ranging from internal pressures within Uruk itself to the burgeoning strength of regional powers that had absorbed, adapted, or simply grown weary of Uruk's pervasive presence. It's like a massive corporate empire that, after years of aggressive growth, suddenly finds itself facing increasing competition and logistical challenges that make its global reach unsustainable. The peak of Uruk's expansion is generally placed in the Uruk IV period, c. 3300–3100 BCE. After this vibrant phase, archaeological evidence suggests a gradual pulling back, a lessening of Uruk's direct control or influence over its more distant outposts. Many of the Urukian-style settlements in regions like northern Mesopotamia and Elam, southwestern Iran, either saw a decrease in Urukian material culture, underwent significant local adaptations, or were simply abandoned. This wasn't a catastrophic collapse overnight, but rather a slow unpicking of the intricate web of connections that Uruk had so painstakingly woven. One of the primary reasons for this retraction was likely regional resistance. As Uruk's model of urbanism, administration, and resource extraction spread, it inevitably encountered existing local polities and populations. While some may have initially welcomed the economic opportunities presented by Uruk's networks, over time, the imposition of Urukian cultural norms, administrative systems, and demands for resources likely generated resentment. Imagine a local chieftain watching Urukian administrators managing his region's resources, or local craftsmen being outcompeted by mass-produced Urukian goods. It's only a matter of time before they start asking, what exactly are we getting out of this arrangement? This could have led to increased friction, localized conflicts, and a desire for greater autonomy among the peripheral regions. Another significant factor was the sheer logistical challenge of maintaining such a vast and diffuse network. Uruk's expansion relied on complex trade routes and administrative oversight, stretching over hundreds and thousands of kilometers. Protecting these routes, ensuring the loyalty of distant outposts, and managing the flow of goods and information would have required immense resources and a constant, vigilant effort, as communication and travel were slow and arduous in the ancient world. The further away an outpost was, the harder it would have been for Uruk to exert direct control or provide timely support. Think of it like trying to manage a sprawling empire with no internet, no telephones, and messengers who travel on foot or by donkey. It becomes incredibly inefficient and prone to break down. Furthermore, it's plausible that internal factors within Uruk itself contributed to the decline. Perhaps the strains of supporting such a large urban population and funding continuous monumental construction projects became too great. Resource depletion in the immediate vicinity of Uruk or changes in the course of the Euphrates could have put pressure on the city's agricultural base. While not explicitly documented, internal political strife or shifts in leadership could also have diverted resources and attention away from maintaining the distant expansion. There's always the possibility that the priest kings just decided they had enough on their plates at home. The scholarly debate here often centers on whether the decline of the Uruk expansion was a sign of fundamental weakness or simply a natural retrenchment. Some argue that Uruk had overextended itself, becoming too thin on the ground, making it vulnerable to local resistance and the rising power of newly emerging centers. Others suggest that the expansion was incredibly successful in its goal of establishing connections and securing resources, and that its retraction merely signifies a shift from direct control to a more indirect, perhaps tributary, relationship with its former sphere of influence. Regardless, the outcome was a more fragmented geopolitical landscape, with new regional centers beginning to assert their own identities and power. The era of Uruk as the singular, overwhelmingly dominant force was drawing to a close, paving the way for a new chapter in Mesopotamian history. As the Uruk expansion receded, leaving behind a less centralized and more fragmented landscape, Uruk itself transitioned into a new, fascinating phase, the early dynastic transition. Imagine the ripple effect after a dominant power withdraws or lessens its grip. New forces emerge, old structures adapt, and the geopolitical map begins to redraw itself. This period, roughly spanning from 2900 to 2350 BCE, marks the shift from the largely undifferentiated priest-king-led Uruk state to a Mesopotamia characterized by a multitude of independent, often competing city-states, each with its own distinct identity, ruling dynasties, and burgeoning sense of political autonomy. It's like a large, monolithic corporation breaking up into several smaller, competitive companies, each eager to carve out its own market share. Following the late Uruk period, the trend shifted towards the development of numerous smaller urban centers across Sumer. While Uruk remained a significant city, it was no longer the sole, overwhelming superpower. Instead, cities like Ur, Lagash, Nippur, Kish, and Mari rose to prominence, each developing its own distinctive political and cultural identity. This proliferation of independent new city-states was a hallmark of the early dynastic period. These cities were often walled, reflecting a period of increased intercity rivalry and conflict, a stark contrast to the more expansive, perhaps less overtly militaristic, Uruk expansion. The archaeological record shows increasing evidence of fortifications and even depictions of warfare, suggesting that the competition for land, water, and resources was becoming more intense. The governance within these new city-states also evolved. While the role of the temple remained crucial, there was a clearer emergence of secular rulers, often referred to as Lugal, great man or king, whose power derived more explicitly from their military prowess and administrative capabilities, rather than solely from their priestly functions. This doesn't mean the religious aspect disappeared. Far from it. Kings still performed vital religious duties and sought divine legitimacy. But the balance of power began to shift, moving away from the pure priest-king model seen in early Uruk. This decentralization of power meant that instead of one dominant center, Mesopotamia became a patchwork of vying kingdoms, each with its own agenda and ambitions. It's almost like a fragmented ancient United Nations, with each city-state holding its own seat, and not always playing nicely. This period also saw the standardization and refinement of cuneiform writing. While its origins lay in Uruk's administrative needs, during the early dynastic period, cuneiform became more sophisticated, capable of expressing a wider range of linguistic and literary forms. We see the emergence of actual historical inscriptions, royal annals, and even early literary works, suggesting that writing was no longer just for accounting. It was now a tool for propaganda, prestige, and preserving the narratives of rulers. This shift reflects the growing complexity of intercity relations and the desire of individual kings to legitimize their rule and chronicle their achievements. A significant scholarly debate concerns the exact causes of this fragmentation. Was it a natural evolution, an inevitable outcome of cities growing and developing their own distinct identities? Or was it a response to environmental pressures, such as shifting river courses or climate change, which might have led to increased competition for fertile land and water, thus fostering rivalry among cities? Some theories suggest that the very success of Uruk's model, once adopted by others, led to its own undoing, as former dependents became self-sufficient competitors. Regardless, the early dynastic period was characterized by a dynamic, often turbulent, political landscape where alliances shifted, wars were fought, and individual city-states rose and fell in prominence. Despite the decentralization, Uruk itself remained a significant cultural and religious center during this period. Its Yana temple district continued to be a site of immense religious importance, drawing pilgrims and influencing religious practices across Sumer. While not necessarily wielding the same hegemonic power it once did, Uruk's legacy as the birthplace of urbanism and writing ensured its continued prestige. Its very existence served as a reminder of a grander, unified past, even as the present was defined by independent polities. This transition laid the groundwork for the more historically documented periods of Mesopotamian history, moving from the proto-literate mists of Uruk's golden age into the era of named kings, recorded battles, and the vibrant, if often tumultuous, interactions between fiercely independent city-states. Emerging from the tumultuous early dynastic period, where independent city-states vied for supremacy, Uruk's narrative takes an intriguing turn, delving into the realm of legend with its most famous and enduring figure, Uruk's legendary rulers, particularly Gilgamesh. Imagine a king so mighty, so extraordinary, that his exploits transcended mere historical record, becoming enshrined in epic poetry that would echo through millennia, shaping not just the mythology of Mesopotamia, but influencing tales across the ancient world. While the historical Gilgamesh may remain elusive, shrouded in the mists of antiquity, his story, filled with quests for immortality, battles with mythical beasts, and profound meditations on life and death, offers a window into the values, fears, and aspirations of the people who conceived him. It's like finding a superhero from ancient times, whose incredible feats and poignant struggles still resonate with us today, even if we can't quite pinpoint his exact address. The figure of Gilgamesh, often identified as the fifth king of Uruk in the Sumerian king list, is believed to have ruled sometime in the early dynastic II period, likely around 2700 BCE. However, the line between historical fact and mythical embellishment is incredibly blurry when it comes to Gilgamesh. The earliest Sumerian poems about him describe him as a great hero, a powerful warrior, and a builder of Uruk's monumental walls. These early tales, often short and episodic, focus on individual adventures: his conflict with Aga of Kish, his journey to the cedar forest, or his descent to the underworld. They paint a picture of a king grappling with the challenges of early urban rule, from defending his city to seeking wisdom and overcoming formidable foes. However, it is the much later, more unified Epic of Gilgamesh, compiled in the Old Babylonian period, early 2nd millennium BCE, and later beautifully rendered in the Standard Babylonian version, mid-2nd to mid-1st millennium BCE, that truly solidified his legend. This epic transforms Gilgamesh from a powerful human king into a semi-divine figure, two-thirds god and one-third man, wrestling with fundamental questions of mortality, friendship, and the meaning of existence. The epic's narrative arc is profoundly human, despite its fantastical elements. It begins with Gilgamesh as a tyrannical ruler, oppressing the people of Uruk, who cry out to the gods for relief. In response, the gods create Enkidu, a wild man raised among animals, to challenge Gilgamesh. Their initial brutal fight, a true clash of titans, ultimately leads not to destruction, but to a profound friendship. Together, Gilgamesh and Enkidu embark on incredible adventures, slaying the monstrous Humbaba, guardian of the cedar forest, and killing the bull of heaven sent by the goddess Ishtar, who, incidentally, was Inanna's later Akkadian counterpart and a powerful deity of Uruk. Remember her from section 3? The death of Enkidu, however, profoundly affects Gilgamesh, forcing him to confront his own mortality. This existential crisis drives him on a desperate quest for immortality, a journey that takes him to the ends of the earth to find Utnapishtim, the only mortal granted eternal life after surviving a great flood. The epic tales associated with his reign are rich with symbolism and psychological depth. Gilgamesh's journey to Utnapishtim, his failure to achieve physical immortality, and his ultimate return to Uruk, changed, wiser, and accepting of his fate, underscore a central Mesopotamian understanding of the human condition. Immortality is not for mortals, but lasting fame and legacy can be achieved through great deeds and the building of enduring structures. And what structure could be more enduring than the very walls of Uruk, attributed to Gilgamesh himself? The narrative ends with him reflecting on the strength and beauty of Uruk's walls, a lasting monument to his rule, proving that even if you can't live forever, your city's walls just might. This mainstream historical fact, woven into the fabric of Uruk's history, highlights a crucial aspect of ancient kingship: the blend of actual historical figures with mythological amplification. Whether Gilgamesh was truly two-thirds god or could single-handedly wrestle bulls is beside the point. The importance lies in how his story served as a powerful cultural narrative for the people of Uruk and beyond, defining ideals of kingship, heroism, and the human struggle against fate. The epic, with its vivid descriptions of Uruk's grandeur and its depiction of a mighty, if flawed, ruler, cemented Uruk's place not just in history, but in the collective memory of humanity, inspiring countless stories and works of art for millennia to come. Building upon the legendary foundation laid by figures like Gilgamesh, our understanding of Uruk's place in the broader Mesopotamian narrative is significantly shaped by the Sumerian king list and its historical context. Imagine a meticulously compiled, albeit often mythical, chronicle of kingship, stretching back to the dawn of time, purporting to list every ruler of Sumer, from the moment kingship descended from heaven after the Great Flood. This ancient document, preserved on various clay tablets, attempts to impose a linear unified historical framework onto a period often characterized by fragmented polities and fluctuating hegemonies. While certainly not a dry academic history text in the modern sense, it offers tantalizing glimpses into how the Sumerians themselves perceived their past, and importantly, how they understood Uruk's pivotal role within it. It's like finding a family tree that goes back to the Big Bang, filled with half-remembered ancestors and a few clearly made-up ones, but still telling a story about where everyone came from. The Sumerian king list is a fascinating, if sometimes frustrating, historical source. It lists a succession of dynasties and kings from various Sumerian cities, often attributing incredibly long reigns to the earliest pre-flood rulers, some living for tens of thousands of years, which, let's be honest, is a bit of a stretch for even the healthiest diet. After the Great Flood, which the list presents as a pivotal cataclysmic event, the reigns become more plausible, though still often exaggerated. Crucially, the list aims to present a single, continuous line of kingship, suggesting that at any given time, one city held the kingship over all of Sumer. This concept of a unified kingship, however, is often contradicted by archaeological evidence, which points to multiple city-states coexisting and competing simultaneously. This leads to a significant open historiographic mystery. Was the list a historical record, a political manifesto, or a blend of both, designed to legitimize certain dynasties by linking them to a glorious, divinely ordained past? Despite its legendary aspects, the Sumerian king list is invaluable because it explicitly chronicles Uruk's rulers within the broader Mesopotamian historical narrative. Uruk features prominently, especially in the early post-flood sections. After the first dynasty of Kish, the city where kingship first descended after the flood, according to the list, Uruk is presented as the next city to hold the prestigious kingship. This succession includes the famous figures we've touched upon, Enmerkar, Lugalbanda, and Gilgamesh. The list states, for example, in Uruk, Enmerkar, the son of Meshkia Gusher, king of Uruk, who built Uruk, ruled 420 years. Again, perhaps a slight overestimation on the lifespan, but you get the idea. It then continues with Lugalbanda, and most famously, Gilgamesh, often stating, Gilgamesh, whose father was a phantom, lord of Kulaba, ruled 126 years. The king list's inclusion of Uruk's legendary figures serves to elevate the city's status and embed it deeply into the foundational mythology of Sumerian civilization. By presenting these figures as part of a grand, linear succession, the list effectively frames Uruk as a foundational power, the inheritor of divine kingship, and a pivotal center in the early history of humanity. This narrative reinforces Uruk's prestige long after its period of greatest political and economic dominance had waned. It's a powerful form of cultural memory, ensuring that even if other cities rose to temporary power, Uruk was remembered as the place where urban civilization, and with it kingship, truly began. The historical context of the Sumerian king list's compilation is also critical. While the events it describes are ancient, many of the surviving copies date from much later periods, often from the Old Babylonian period, early 2nd millennium BCE, long after the early dynastic era. This suggests that the list was not merely a contemporary record, but a later attempt to make sense of, and perhaps rationalize, a complex and often chaotic past. It reflects a desire for order, a need to connect present rulers to a glorious lineage and to define a shared Sumerian identity. The fact that different versions of the list exist, with some variations in the order or duration of reigns, points to its evolving nature and its role as a flexible historical narrative rather than a rigid, factual document. Despite its historical inaccuracies, it remains an invaluable tool for understanding the Sumerians' own perception of their rich, deep past and Uruk's central, almost sacred, role within it. Beyond the towering legend of Gilgamesh, the Sumerian king list and other epic poems illuminate two other pivotal, if somewhat less globally famous figures in Uruk's early history, Lugalbanda and Enmakar narratives. Imagine these tales not just as stories, but as ancient blueprints for ideal kingship, adventures that explored the boundaries of human endurance, divine favor, and the very concept of urban civilization. These narratives, woven from the rich tapestry of Sumerian mythology and oral tradition, provide deeper insights into Uruk's self-perception, its foundational myths, and the qualities its people valued in their leaders, long before they were ever penned down onto clay tablets. It's like discovering the secret origin stories of founding fathers, revealing the core values they were believed to embody, even if some of the details stretch the bounds of belief. Enmerkar, often identified as Gilgamesh's grandfather or an earlier predecessor in the Sumerian king list, is a figure directly associated with the very origins of Uruk's monumental status. The epic poem Enmerkar and the Lord of Aratta is particularly significant. This narrative describes a lengthy and complex diplomatic and later military rivalry between Enmerkar, the Lord of Uruk, and the unnamed Lord of Aratta, a distant, resource-rich land, possibly in modern-day Iran or Armenia. The core of the conflict revolves around Uruk's desire to acquire precious materials, gold, silver, lapis lazuli, and various stones, to build and adorn its temples, particularly the Inanna shrine for Inanna. Remember how important those trade networks and resource acquisitions were for Uruk back in Section 9? This epic provides a mythical justification for exactly that. The narrative of Enmakar and the Lord of Aratta is famous for several reasons. Firstly, it features a series of back-and-forth challenges and riddles exchanged between the two lords, mediated by messengers who travel vast distances. This highlights the importance of diplomacy and communication in the ancient world, even if it sometimes involves sending a messenger on what amounts to an ancient intellectual relay race. Secondly, and perhaps most significantly, this epic contains a passage often interpreted as alluding to the invention of writing, when Enmerkar's messenger becomes too tired to deliver a complex oral message. Enmerkar himself supposedly invents writing by pressing words onto clay, stating, since the messenger's mouth was too heavy and he could not repeat it, the Lord of Kulaba, Uruk, patted some clay and put the words on it like a tablet. This makes Enmakar, in Sumerian tradition, the progenitor of written communication, a truly monumental achievement that we explored in Section 7. This tale, therefore, weaves Uruk's quest for resources directly into the origin story of one of civilization's most crucial inventions, underscoring the practical impetus behind the development of writing. Then there is Lugalbanda, often portrayed as Enmerkar's successor and Gilgamesh's father, another legendary king of Uruk. His stories, particularly Lugalbanda, in the mountain cave and Lugalbanda and the answered bird present him as a pious, resourceful, and divinely favored hero. These narratives are less about grand political struggles and more about personal endurance and communion with the divine. In Lugalbanda, in the mountain cave, he is left behind, ill, during an expedition to Arata, part of Enmakar's campaign. Through sheer determination, piety, and divine intervention, specifically from the sun, god Utu, he recovers and makes his way back to Uruk, gaining special abilities along the way. Lugalbanda and the answered bird sees him encountering a powerful mythical creature, the answered bird, a lion-headed eagle. Through respectful interaction and by feeding the answered's chick, Lugalbanda earns the bird's favor and receives magical powers, including incredible speed, allowing him to return to Uruk swiftly and aid Enmakar. These tales emphasize qualities like piety, perseverance, and the importance of divine blessing for a king. They portray a leader who earns his power not just through strength, but through wisdom, respect for nature, or at least for powerful mythical beasts, and a deep connection to the divine. A fascinating scholarly debate concerns the historical kernel, if any, within these narratives. Were Enmarkar and Lugalbanda actual historical figures, their deeds amplified and mythologized over time? Or are they purely archetypal figures, personifications of ideal Sumerian kingship and the challenges of early state building? Most scholars agree that while the details are clearly mythical, the core themes, the importance of trade, the invention of writing, the role of divine favor, and the endurance of leadership reflect genuine concerns and achievements of the Uruk period. These narratives, far from being mere bedtime stories, served as foundational myths for Uruk, legitimizing its claims to power and its innovations, teaching later generations about their glorious past and the essential qualities of a truly great city and its rulers. Just as the legendary reigns of Gilgamesh, Enmakar, and Lugalbanda settled into Uruk's historical consciousness, a seismic shift occurred in Mesopotamia, ushering in the era of the Akkadian conquest and Uruk's adaptation. Imagine a vast, unified empire rising from the north, spearheaded by a charismatic and formidable leader, threatening to eclipse the independent city-states that had defined Sumer for centuries. This wasn't a gradual cultural diffusion like the Uruk expansion. This was a military and political absorption, a forced unification under a new linguistic and cultural banner. For Uruk, a city with a proud and ancient lineage, this conquest represented both a challenge to its autonomy and an opportunity to adapt and endure under a new imperial order. It's like a grand old family business suddenly being bought out by a massive, aggressive conglomerate. You might lose some independence, but you can also find a new role within a larger system. The rise of the Akkadian Empire, beginning around 2334 BCE, marked a pivotal moment in Mesopotamian history. Its founder, Sargon of Akkad, emerged from relative obscurity to conquer virtually all of Mesopotamia, uniting Sumer and Akkad under a single ruler for the first time. Sargon was a military genius and a shrewd administrator, building an empire that stretched from the Persian Gulf to the Mediterranean Sea. His conquests were swift and decisive, employing a professional army and new military tactics. For the individual city-states of Sumer, including Uruk, this meant the end of their fiercely guarded independence and the imposition of a centralized imperial administration. For Uruk, A city that had once been the primary engine of urbanization and cultural influence, the Akkadian conquest meant becoming a part of a larger empire. The details of Uruk's specific resistance or surrender to Sargon are not extensively documented, but it's clear that it, like other major Sumerian cities, eventually fell under Akkadian dominion. This presented a unique challenge to a city so deeply rooted in its own Sumerian identity and its long tradition of local autonomy. How do you maintain your prestige and cultural integrity when a new foreign power is dictating terms? Uruk's response was one of adaptation. Instead of being completely destroyed or abandoned, Uruk continued to exist and even thrive under Akkadian rule. The Akkadians, while imposing their own language, Akkadian, a Semitic language, and certain administrative practices, were also keen to legitimize their rule by respecting existing religious traditions and incorporating aspects of Sumerian culture. This meant that the great temples of Uruk, particularly the Iana district, likely continued to function, albeit under Akkadian oversight. The cult of Inanna, Ishtar in Akkadian, remained strong, and Akkadian rulers often made offerings to the Sumerian gods, demonstrating a pragmatic approach to governance that recognized the deep religious sensibilities of the conquered populations. A significant mainstream historical fact regarding this period is the role of Akkadian daughters being appointed as high priestesses in important Sumerian cult centers. For example, Sargon's daughter in Hedwana was appointed as the high priestess of the moon god Nanna in Ur, a very prominent position. While we don't have explicit records of an Akkadian princess serving in Uruk, it's highly probable that similar measures were taken to integrate the city into the imperial structure and ensure its loyalty. This strategy blended religious authority with political control, a familiar concept to Uruk given its own history of priest-kings. However, the Akkadian period wasn't without its tensions. The imposition of a new language and a centralized imperial structure likely caused friction. We see evidence of rebellions throughout the Akkadian period, as various Sumerian cities sought to regain their independence. While Uruk's direct involvement in these rebellions isn't always clear, it's reasonable to assume that the desire for self-rule persisted beneath the veneer of imperial peace. This period represents a fascinating example of cultural and political syncretism, where two distinct civilizations interacted, influenced each other, and ultimately shaped the future of Mesopotamia. Uruk, once the independent pioneer, became a crucial, if sometimes reluctant, component of the world's first empire, demonstrating its enduring resilience and capacity to find its place, even under a new master. Just as the Akkadian Empire eventually waned, succumbing to internal strife and external pressures, Uruk, along with the rest of Mesopotamia, experienced a remarkable resurgence during the Ur-III period Renaissance. Imagine a time when Sumerian culture, after a period of Akkadian dominance, experienced a vibrant rebirth, marked by renewed centralization, monumental construction, and a sophisticated administrative system. This era, lasting from roughly 2112 to 2004 BCE, saw the rise of the Third Dynasty of Ur, which aimed to re-establish a unified Mesopotamian state, echoing the imperial ambitions of Akkad, but with a distinctly Sumerian cultural emphasis. For Uruk, this wasn't just survival. It was a chance to reclaim some of its ancient glory, with its revered temples once again becoming focal points of imperial patronage. It's like a beloved historical brand after a period of being acquired and rebranded, finally returning to its roots and experiencing a massive comeback. Following the collapse of the Akkadian Empire, Mesopotamia entered a period often referred to as the Dark Age or Gutian period, characterized by political fragmentation and, according to later Sumerian sources, barbarian incursions from the Gutian people. However, order was eventually restored, leading to the rise of the third dynasty of Ur, founded by Ur-Nama. Ur-Nama and his successors embarked on an ambitious program of state building, aiming to create a highly centralized empire that controlled much of Mesopotamia. This was a period of renewed temple building and administrative centralization, a conscious effort to revive and even surpass the glories of earlier eras, particularly the Uruk-Mafo period and the Akkadian Empire. For Uruk, the Ur-3 period was a time of significant revitalization. Its ancient Eanna precinct, sacred to Inanna, received considerable attention and investment from the Othra kings. Ur-Nama, in particular, was a prodigious builder, known for constructing or restoring ziggurats across his empire. The Great Ziggurat of Ur is the most famous example, but archaeological evidence indicates that similar projects were undertaken at Uruk. Imagine the dusty ruins of older temples being cleared, and new, even grander structures rising in their place, financed by the imperial treasury and built by organized labor gangs. This imperial patronage underscored Uruk's enduring religious importance as a cult center, even within a newly centralized political structure. The administrative system of the Ur-3 Empire was incredibly sophisticated, arguably the most bureaucratic of the ancient world to that point. It relied heavily on the cuneiform writing system, which was perfected during this period. Thousands upon thousands of administrative texts have been recovered, detailing everything from grain disbursements and livestock movements to labor assignments and tax collections. This level of meticulous record-keeping speaks to a highly organized, centrally controlled economy. Uruk, as a major provincial capital and a vital religious center, would have been a crucial node within this vast administrative network. Its scribes and administrators played a key role in managing the flow of resources and information within the empire, ensuring that the central government in Ur could effectively govern its far-flung territories. A significant mainstream historical fact from this period is the construction of massive defensive walls, or rather, the maintenance and enhancement of existing ones around many Ur-3 cities, including Uruk. While the empire aimed for internal stability, external threats from nomadic groups and rival powers were a constant concern. The monumental walls of Uruk, already ancient by this time, would have been maintained and possibly reinforced, demonstrating the city's strategic importance and the empire's commitment to its defense. This wasn't just about protection. It was also a visible symbol of state power and the organized capacity of the empire. However, despite this renaissance, an interesting scholarly debate arises concerning the true nature of Uruk's autonomy during this period. Was it a truly free city, albeit within an empire, or was it simply a provincial capital managed directly by Ur's central authority? While it benefited greatly from imperial patronage and remained a major religious center, its political independence was certainly curtailed compared to its Uruk-4 heyday, or even parts of the early dynastic period. Yet the very act of reinvesting in Uruk's sacred spaces indicates its enduring prestige and its symbolic value to the Ur III kings, who sought to tap into the ancient city's legacy to legitimize their own rule. The Ur III Renaissance for Uruk was therefore a complex blend of renewed glory and integrated dependence, a testament to its long-standing cultural significance, allowing it to flourish under new imperial masters. No sooner had Uruk basked in the reflected glory of the Ur III Renaissance than the Mesopotamian stage shifted yet again, plunging the region into the tumultuous Isin-Lhasa period, shifting powers. Imagine a time of intense political fluidity, where the grand, unified empire of Ur III fractured into competing regional kingdoms, each vying for control, land, and influence. This era, spanning roughly from 2004 to 1763 BCE, was characterized by a constant ebb and flow of power, with cities rising to temporary dominance only to be challenged and eclipsed by others. For Uruk, this meant navigating a complex political landscape, no longer part of a stable empire, but caught between powerful neighbors, often becoming a prize in their struggles for supremacy. It's like being a valuable piece on a chessboard, constantly being eyed and moved by different ambitious players. The collapse of the Ur III Empire was swift and brutal, precipitated by a combination of internal administrative strain, economic difficulties, and relentless pressure from external nomadic groups, particularly the Amorites from the west. With the central authority of Ergon, a power vacuum emerged, and former provincial governors and local dynasts quickly asserted their independence. This led to the proliferation of numerous independent city-states, the most prominent of which were Isin and Larsa, hence the period's name. These two cities, along with Babylon, Eshnunna, and others, engaged in a protracted struggle for hegemony over Sumer and Akkad. During this period, Uruk found itself in a precarious position, strategically located in southern Mesopotamia, making it a coveted possession for any aspiring regional power. Its ancient lineage, its monumental temples, and its fertile agricultural lands made it a valuable asset. The city often became a flashpoint, changing hands between Isin and Lhasa multiple times. Imagine the city's inhabitants enduring sieges, occupations, and the constant uncertainty of whose banner they would wake up under each morning. It must have been a rather unsettling time, to say the least. The rulers of Isin and Larsa, in their quest for legitimacy and power, often paid homage to the traditional Sumerian cultural and religious centers. Uruk, with its revered Iana temple, remained a profoundly important cult site. Kings from both Isin and Lhasa would boast of their efforts to rebuild or restore Uruk's temples, seeking divine favor and demonstrating their piety to the wider Sumerian world. This meant that while Uruk might suffer politically, its religious infrastructure often continued to receive investment, preserving its cultural heritage even amidst political instability. It's like a perpetually popular tourist destination that everyone wants to own, not just for the revenue, but for the prestige it confers. A significant scholarly debate during the Isin-Lhasa period centers on the exact nature of the relationship between these warring states and their claims to Sumerian kingship. Each city-state's ruler would declare himself king of Sumer and Akkad, even when their actual control was limited to their immediate vicinity. This highlights a continuity of ideology from the Ur period, the idea of a unified Mesopotamia, even if the reality was one of constant fragmentation. Uruk's role in these claims was often passive, but crucial. Whoever controlled Uruk could claim a stronger link to the ancient Sumerian heritage and its revered religious sites. This era was not just defined by conflict, however. It also saw continued cultural development, particularly in literature, with the copying and composition of many Sumerian literary works. The legal code of Lipit Ishtar of Isin, for example, is a testament to the ongoing sophistication of Mesopotamian law. Despite the political fragmentation, the underlying cultural continuity of Sumerian civilization remained strong, nurtured in cities like Uruk that managed to persist through the shifting tides of power. The city of Uruk, once a singular dominant force, now existed as a highly prized, if often contested, jewel in a crown that was constantly changing hands. Its ancient resilience was put to the test, but its sacred foundations ensured its survival, albeit in a world far more complex and dangerous than its initial flourishing. Just as the political landscape of Mesopotamia continuously shifted during the Isin-Lhasa period, Uruk, along with its contemporaries, eventually faced the long, drawn-out process of the old Babylonian decline and legacy. Imagine a majestic river, once overflowing with power and vitality, gradually narrowing its course, its waters still flowing but with less force, leaving behind a vast, fertile delta as its enduring gift. This era, roughly from 1763 to 1595 BCE, marks the eventual triumph of Babylon under Hammurabi, followed by a period of relative stability and then a gradual decline for many of the old Sumerian cities, including Uruk. While Uruk never entirely disappeared from the map, its role as a dynamic, leading urban center waned, giving way to new powers and new cultural paradigms, though the seeds it had sown would continue to bear fruit for millennia. It's like watching a once dominant technological innovator slowly lose its edge as new players enter the market, eventually becoming a respected but quieter presence. The Old Babylonian period began with the rise of the Amorite dynasty in Babylon, culminating in the reign of Hammurabi, Sa'i, 1790–1750 BCE. Hammurabi, a brilliant military strategist and shrewd legislator, managed to defeat the rival states of Isin and Larsa, unifying much of Mesopotamia under Babylonian rule. For Uruk, this meant yet another change of overlord. While Hammurabi often presented himself as a benevolent ruler and continued to invest in the restoration of temples, including those in Uruk, the city's political autonomy was now definitively subsumed under the vast Babylonian Empire. The famous Code of Hammurabi, while not directly related to Uruk's internal governance, represents the culmination of Mesopotamian legal traditions, many of which had their roots in the administrative needs of early cities like Uruk. Under Babylonian rule, Uruk continued to function as a significant provincial center, especially known for its ancient Iana temple. Archaeological evidence suggests continued occupation and religious activity, with dedications and repairs made by Babylonian kings. However, the economic and political gravity of Mesopotamia had firmly shifted north to Babylon. Uruk was no longer a driving force of innovation or empire building. It was a revered, ancient city, valued for its historical and religious significance within a larger imperial framework. Think of it as a respected historical landmark rather than a bustling modern capital. The gradual decline of Uruk and other old Sumerian cities during this period was multifaceted. Environmental factors likely played a significant role. Over centuries of intensive irrigation, the land in southern Mesopotamia became increasingly salinized, making it less fertile and harder to cultivate. This ecological degradation would have put immense pressure on the agricultural base that sustained large urban populations, leading to reduced yields and forcing populations to seek more viable land elsewhere. Imagine a farm where the soil slowly becomes poisoned, making it harder and harder to grow crops, eventually forcing families to move. Furthermore, political instability following Hammurabi's reign contributed to the decline. Successive Babylonian kings struggled to maintain control over the vast empire, facing internal rebellions and external pressures from groups like the Kassites. These periods of instability would have disrupted trade routes, weakened central authority, and made life in the southern cities increasingly difficult. People might have migrated north towards more stable regions or smaller, more manageable settlements. Despite this decline, Uruk left an indelible legacy. The very concept of urbanism, monumental architecture, advanced administration, and above all, writing, had originated or seen its first major flourishing in Uruk. These innovations were not lost. They were absorbed, adapted, and further developed by successive Mesopotamian civilizations, including the Babylonians. The scribal traditions that began with proto-cuneiform in Uruk continued to evolve, giving rise to the vast corpus of Sumerian and Akkadian literature, legal codes, and scientific texts that define Mesopotamian civilization. Uruk's temples continue to serve as repositories of ancient knowledge and religious practice, ensuring the continuity of cultural traditions. An interesting scholarly debate here is whether the decline was truly a decline or merely a transformation. While its political and economic dominance faded, Uruk's cultural and religious influence as a venerable ancestor of Mesopotamian civilization continued to resonate. The old city, though perhaps quieter than its roaring past, remained a silent testament to its profound contributions, its very stones, whispering tales of human ingenuity and resilience across the changing tides of empires. Even as the old Babylonian period saw many of the ancient Sumerian cities wane, Uruk, with its deep roots and enduring religious significance, experienced intermittent periods of renewed vitality. One such notable resurgence occurred during the Neo-Babylonian revival. Imagine a distant echo of Uruk's ancient grandeur, resonating through a new empire centuries after its initial peak. This period, roughly from 626 to 539 BCE, saw a powerful new Babylonian empire rise, conquering the Assyrians and re-establishing Mesopotamian dominance. For Uruk, this meant a renewed wave of royal patronage, significant rebuilding efforts, and a brief, yet significant, return to prominence as a major cultic center. It's like a beloved but aging rock star staging a hugely successful comeback tour, reminding everyone of their enduring appeal. The Neo-Babylonian Empire, under formidable rulers like Nabopolassar and, most famously, Nebuchadnezzar II, embarked on ambitious building programs across Mesopotamia, while Babylon itself was transformed into a dazzling imperial capital. These kings also invested heavily in the ancient cult centers, understanding that the legitimacy of their rule was tied to the favor of the gods and the respect for long-standing religious traditions. Uruk, with its sacred Iana precinct and its deep association with the goddess Ishtar, the Akkadian equivalent of Sumerian Inanna, was a prime beneficiary of this royal attention. During this period, there was renewed construction and religious activity in Uruk. Archaeological excavations have revealed extensive rebuilding and restoration efforts in the Iana district. The temples, many of which had fallen into disrepair during the intervening centuries of instability, were refurbished and expanded. New walls, courtyards, and cultic structures were added, all reflecting the architectural styles and religious fervor of the Neo-Babylonian era. Imagine new generations of craftsmen and laborers, perhaps speaking Akkadian, but deeply aware of the ancient Sumerian legacy, working to restore the sacred spaces that had stood for millennia. This wasn't just maintenance. It was a conscious effort to revitalize the city's spiritual heart. Kings like Nabopolassar and Nebuchadnezzar II left numerous inscriptions detailing their pious acts, including their building activities in Uruk. These inscriptions often highlight their devotion to Ishtar and other deities, explicitly linking their imperial power to divine approval. This not only provided tangible evidence of royal patronage, but also solidified Uruk's position as a crucial religious site within the empire. It's almost as if the emperors were trying to collect spiritual merit badges by investing in these ancient holy places. Beyond the grand temple constructions, the Neo-Babylonian period also saw continued scribal activity in Uruk. Thousands of administrative and legal texts from this era have been found, detailing the day-to-day economic life of the city. These documents show a vibrant community, still engaged in agriculture, trade, and various crafts, albeit now under the centralized administration of the Neo-Babylonian Empire. The cuneiform script continued to be used, though often by now for Akkadian rather than Sumerian, reflecting the linguistic shift that had occurred over the millennia. An interesting scholarly debate concerns the extent to which this revival truly restored Uruk to its former glory. While there was undoubtedly significant investment and activity, it was primarily driven by imperial decree from Babylon, not by Uruk's inherent political or economic autonomy. Uruk functioned as a provincial center, albeit a very important religious one. Its population may not have reached its peak Uruk-4 numbers, and its political influence was certainly curtailed. However, the Neo-Babylonian period undeniably represents a significant flourishing for the ancient city, injecting new life into its venerable institutions and ensuring its continued importance in the religious landscape of Mesopotamia. The enduring power of its sacred sites, even after millennia, pulled the city back from the brink, demonstrating the deep spiritual connection that Mesopotamians held for their ancestral urban heartlands. No sooner had Uruk experienced its fleeting Neo-Babylonian resurgence than the geopolitical currents of the ancient world shifted once more, ushering in the Achaemenid and Hellenistic eras. Imagine an ancient city steeped in millennia of history, now finding itself under the dominion of vast foreign empires, far removed culturally and geographically from its Sumerian origins. This period, spanning from roughly 539 BCE to the mid-2nd century BCE, saw Mesopotamia absorbed first into the mighty Persian Empire, and then, after Alexander the Great's conquests, into the Hellenistic kingdoms founded by his successors. For Uruk, this meant yet another layer of imperial rule, but one that paradoxically allowed its ancient religious traditions to persist, even as new cultural influences began to filter in. It's like a grand historic monument that, despite changing ownership multiple times, manages to retain its core identity, attracting visitors and admirers from vastly different backgrounds. The Achaemenid Persian Empire, founded by Cyrus the Great, swept into Mesopotamia in 539 BCE, bringing an end to the Neo-Babylonian Empire. The Persians, known for their administrative efficiency and generally tolerant approach to conquered peoples' cultures and religions, allowed Uruk's ancient religious institutions to continue functioning. The great Eanna Temple, the heart of Uruk's spiritual life, remained active, and the cult of Ishtar continued to be observed. Persian kings, like their Babylonian predecessors, often made offerings to local deities and supported temple activities, understanding that this fostered stability and legitimized their rule in the eyes of the populace. It was a pragmatic approach. If the locals were happy with their gods, they were less likely to cause trouble. Under Persian rule, Uruk became a provincial city within a vast empire that stretched from India to Greece. While it no longer held any significant political autonomy, its long-standing religious importance ensured its continued existence and some level of prosperity. Scribes continued to produce administrative and legal texts in cuneiform, though now alongside Aramaic, which was becoming the lingua franca of the Achaemenid Empire. This linguistic duality reflects the blending of cultures occurring throughout the empire. Then came Alexander the Great. His conquests in the late 4th century BCE shattered the Achaemenid Empire and ushered in the Hellenistic era. After Alexander's death, his vast empire was divided among his generals, leading to the establishment of the Seleucid Empire, which controlled Mesopotamia. For Uruk, the arrival of the Greeks brought a new wave of foreign influence, both culturally and architecturally. While the Seleucid kings also adopted the Persian policy of supporting local cults to ensure stability, they also introduced Hellenic elements to the Mesopotamian urban landscape. In Uruk, this is visible in the construction of new temples and public buildings that incorporated Greek architectural styles and artistic elements, often alongside traditional Mesopotamian forms. Imagine seeing a temple dedicated to Ishtar, but with Greek-style columns or relief sculptures that subtly blend Hellenic and Mesopotamian artistic conventions. This cultural syncretism is a fascinating aspect of the Hellenistic period, where the ancient traditions of Mesopotamia mingled with the new influences from the Greek world. It's a bit like a cultural fusion restaurant, where familiar flavors are presented with an exotic new twist. A significant scholarly debate concerns the extent of Hellenization in cities like Uruk. While some Greek cultural elements were clearly adopted, particularly in elite circles and new administrative centers, the vast majority of the population likely continued their traditional way of life, speaking their native languages, Akkadian and Aramaic, and worshipping their ancestral gods. Uruk, as a venerable center of Sumerian religious tradition, might have been particularly resistant to wholesale cultural assimilation. Its enduring importance lay in its continuity, its connection to a deep, ancient past that even foreign rulers felt compelled to acknowledge. The Eanna Temple, after thousands of years, remained a beacon of devotion, a powerful testament to the resilience of Uruk's spiritual identity, even as the names of its overlords changed from Sumerian priest kings to Persian shahs and Greek generals. As the Hellenistic influence gradually waned, Uruk found itself entering its final significant period of activity under the Parthian period, final flourish. Imagine a venerable old city having weathered millennia of conquests, cultural shifts, and changing empires, experiencing one last noticeable surge of life before its ultimate descent into obscurity. This era, lasting from roughly the mid-2nd century BCE to the 3rd century CE, saw Mesopotamia become a crucial frontier zone between the Roman Empire to the west and the Parthian Empire to the east. For Uruk, nestled within this contested territory, it meant a continued, if somewhat diminished, role as a religious center, still attracting pilgrims and maintaining its ancient cults, but now primarily defined by its past glories rather than its present political power. It's like a grand old theater that, while no longer hosting major new productions, still puts on beloved classics for a dedicated audience. The Parthian Empire, a formidable power with a blend of Persian and nomadic traditions, gained control of Mesopotamia from the Seleucids. Unlike the more Hellenized Seleucids, the Parthians often adopted a policy that was, in some ways, more deferential to local traditions, particularly religious ones, as long as taxes were paid and order maintained. This approach allowed Uruk's ancient religious institutions to continue their operations with relatively little interference. The great Eanna temple complex, astonishingly, remained a vibrant center of worship for Ishtar, Inanna, a testament to the incredible longevity of its cult. During this final flourish, archaeological evidence from Uruk reveals ongoing construction and renovation within the Eanna precinct. While not on the scale of the Uruk IV period or even the Neo-Babylonian revival, these efforts demonstrate continued investment and a committed priesthood. New temples, often with Parthian architectural features but still dedicated to Mesopotamian deities, were erected. Imagine a blend of styles where ancient Mesopotamian forms might meet with Iranian influences, creating a unique synthesis. The continuation of cuneiform texts, though by now almost exclusively religious or astronomical in nature, and written by a highly specialized priestly class, is particularly remarkable for this period. These late cuneiform tablets from Uruk provide invaluable astronomical observations and ritual texts, showing that the intellectual traditions born in Uruk thousands of years earlier were still, incredibly, being maintained. Uruk's role in the Parthian period appears to have been primarily as a major cult center, attracting pilgrims from across Mesopotamia. Its ancient ziggurats and temples, though perhaps weathered by time, would have remained impressive symbols of a glorious past, drawing those seeking spiritual connection to its hallowed ground. The city likely benefited from the economic activity generated by these pilgrims and the endowments of the temples themselves. While Uruk was no longer a political powerhouse or a center of empire, its spiritual gravity remained immense. It's a bit like Rome or Jerusalem in later periods. Cities whose power was derived not from their armies or treasuries, but from their profound religious significance. An interesting scholarly debate concerns the exact circumstances leading to the eventual abandonment of Uruk after the Parthian period. Was it a gradual process of decline, fueled by changing river courses, environmental degradation, like salinization, which we discussed earlier, or a simple shift in regional demographics? Or was it precipitated by a more dramatic event, such as a major invasion or a shift in imperial policy? While there's no single, universally accepted answer, the increasing instability in Mesopotamia as it became a battleground between the Parthian and later Sasanian empires, and the Roman Empire, certainly didn't help. Constant warfare, economic disruption, and the collapse of long-distance trade routes would have made life in these older, less strategically vital cities increasingly untenable. The very endurance of Uruk, surviving for over 3 millennia, is astounding. Its Parthian flourish was a poignant final chapter, a last burst of life before the ancient city, having given so much to civilization, finally began its long slumber beneath the sands. Following its final quiet flourish under Parthian rule, Uruk, the cradle of civilization, began its slow descent into oblivion, leading to its abandonment and rediscovery. Imagine a once bustling metropolis, a city that pioneered urbanism, writing, and monumental architecture, gradually fading from human memory, its grand temples and palaces crumbling into indistinguishable mounds of earth, eventually to be swallowed by the silent desert. This wasn't a dramatic, cataclysmic event, but rather a long, drawn-out process, a poignant end to a city that had thrived for over 3 millennia before finally being reclaimed by the very land from which it emerged. It's like watching a majestic, ancient tree slowly wither and fall, its mighty branches becoming part of the forest floor, only to be found centuries later by intrepid explorers. The precise timing and reasons for Uruk's ultimate abandonment are a subject of ongoing archaeological investigation and scholarly debate. While there was continued activity into the early Sasanian period, 3rd century CE, by the middle of the 1st millennium CE, Uruk appears to have been largely deserted. Several factors likely contributed to this protracted decline. Firstly, environmental degradation played a crucial role. The intensive irrigation necessary for agriculture in southern Mesopotamia, practiced for thousands of years, led to the widespread salinization of the soil. As salts accumulated in the topsoil, agricultural yields would have steadily decreased, making it increasingly difficult to feed a large urban population. Imagine the land literally becoming poisoned, making farming an ever harder struggle, forcing people to seek more fertile grounds elsewhere. Secondly, changing river courses of the Euphrates itself were a significant factor. Rivers in the flat alluvial plains of Mesopotamia are dynamic. They naturally shift their channels over centuries. If the Euphrates, Uruk's lifeblood, shifted significantly away from the city, maintaining water supply for irrigation and daily needs would have become a monumental, perhaps impossible task. Without easy access to fresh water and the fertile silts of the river, the very reason for Uruk's initial settlement would have evaporated. It's like a city built on a major shipping lane suddenly finding the river has changed course, leaving it high and dry, no longer connected to the vital arteries of commerce and life. Thirdly, the shifting political and economic landscape of the region certainly contributed. As Mesopotamia became a contested borderland between the Roman, Byzantine, and Sasanian empires, continuous warfare and instability would have disrupted trade routes, destroyed infrastructure, and made long-term urban planning precarious. People naturally migrate towards greater security and economic opportunity. The focus of power and population had also long shifted north to new capitals, leaving the old Sumerian cities, like Uruk, as increasingly isolated relics. The final nail in the coffin was likely the rise of new, competing urban centers, and the changing patterns of religious and economic activity in Mesopotamia. And so, Uruk, once the shining beacon of urban civilization, slowly transformed into a series of desolate mounds, known locally as waka. Its mud brick structures, once towering over the landscape, gradually eroded and melted back into the earth, covered by layers of wind-blown sand and the accumulated debris of millennia. The knowledge of its existence persisted in ancient texts, but its physical location became lost to history, a forgotten titan buried beneath the desert. Centuries later, the scientific rediscovery of Uruk began in the 19th century with the explorations of European travelers and scholars. Early archaeological pioneers, often driven by a quest for biblical corroboration or ancient treasures, began to identify and tentatively explore the vast mounds of southern Mesopotamia. William Loftus, a British archaeologist, conducted initial excavations at Warka in 1849 and 1853. He was one of the first to correctly identify the site as ancient Uruk, and his early finds provided tantalizing hints of the city's immense antiquity and importance. Imagine the thrill of standing on those silent mounds, knowing that beneath your feet lay the ruins of the world's first true city, a place whose very name was once synonymous with civilization. This rediscovery was not merely an academic achievement. It was the unlocking of a forgotten chapter of human history, a testament to the enduring power of archaeological inquiry to bring the past back to life. The slow, silent burial of Uruk beneath the desert sands was thankfully not its final chapter. Instead, its rediscovery paved the way for meticulous archaeological excavations and insights, transforming silent mounds of earth into a vibrant, albeit fragmented, narrative of early human civilization. Imagine generations of dedicated archaeologists meticulously sifting through layers of dust and debris, not just looking for glittering gold, but for the subtle clues: a discarded potsherd, a faint mud brick wall, an inscribed clay tablet that could piece together the story of the very first city. This painstaking scientific endeavor, beginning in earnest in the early 20th century, has unearthed an astonishing amount of information about Uruk, allowing us to reconstruct its rise, its triumphs, and its eventual decline, offering incredible insights into the foundational moments of human urban life. It's like a colossal, multi-generational jigsaw puzzle, where each tiny fragment, painstakingly cleaned and analyzed, contributes to a grander, ever more detailed picture. The most significant and sustained archaeological work at Uruk began with the German Oriental Society in the early 20th century, and later by the German Archaeological Institute, DAI, led by pioneering figures such as Julius Jordan, and later by teams under Arnold Nöldeker, Heinrich Lenzen, and Margarete van Es. These excavations have continued for over a century, interrupted only by world wars and regional conflicts. Imagine the sheer scale of such a long-term project, with archaeologists literally digging through thousands of years of accumulated history, layer by archaeological layer. Their approach was systematic, focusing on stratigraphy, the study of layered deposits, to understand the sequence of occupation and development at the site. This rigorous methodology allowed them to differentiate between the various phases of Uruk's existence, from its earliest Ubaid settlements to its Parthian-era temples. The scientific methods used in these excavations were crucial. Beyond traditional digging and mapping, Archaeologists employed techniques like ceramic typology, classifying pottery styles to date layers, analysis of building materials like different types of mud bricks, and increasingly, modern scientific dating methods such as radiocarbon dating. The recovery of thousands of clay tablets, particularly the proto-cuneiform texts, revolutionized our understanding of Uruk's administration and economy. These tiny, unassuming pieces of baked clay were, and still are, a direct line to the minds of ancient bureaucrats, providing unparalleled detail about daily life, transactions, and the concerns of the elite. Without the ability to decipher these texts, much of Uruk's story would remain forever silent. The incredible insights gained from Uruk's ruins are profound. Firstly, the excavations confirmed Uruk's status as the world's first true city. The sheer scale of its urban area, the density of its population, and the monumental scale of its public architecture firmly established it as the birthplace of urbanism. Secondly, the discovery and decipherment of proto-cuneiform tablets provided direct evidence for the invention of writing, showing its evolution from simple pictograms to complex administrative tools, fundamentally altering our understanding of how literacy emerged. Thirdly, the extensive temple complexes of Iana and Anu reveal the central role of religious institutions in early state formation, acting not just as places of worship, but as economic powerhouses and administrative hubs. Furthermore, the archaeological record has illuminated Uruk's vast trade networks, its sophisticated social stratification, and its pioneering role in labor organization. The ubiquitous bevel-rimmed bowls, for example, once a mystery, now speak volumes about mass production and rationing systems. While the identity of the individual priest-kings often remains elusive, the physical evidence of their monumental ambitions stands as a testament to their centralized authority. An ongoing scholarly debate continues to refine our understanding of Uruk, often challenging older interpretations. For instance, the exact nature of the Uruk expansion, whether it was primarily peaceful trade or had elements of coercive influence, is still discussed, with new evidence constantly shaping our views. Today, Uruk remains an active archaeological site, continuing to yield new discoveries and challenging existing theories. Each season brings the potential for fresh insights, further enriching the narrative of this foundational city. The ruins of Uruk, now once again visible as monumental mounds on the Mesopotamian plain, stand as a silent, powerful reminder of human ingenuity, resilience, and the enduring quest to build, to organize, and to understand the world around us. And as you drift off to sleep, perhaps you can picture those ancient walls, those towering ziggurats, and the quiet hum of the world's first city still echoing beneath the earth.